"You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart? The community center's down the block." Laughter echoed off the concrete bay walls as three firefighters in full gear looked over the black woman in civilian clothes. One tossed a dirty mop bucket at her feet. "Welcome to probation. Start cleaning." Angela didn't flinch. She just unzipped her bag, pulled out a white chief's helmet, and placed it slowly on her head. The laughter died. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice ice, "my name is Battalion Chief Andrews. Assemble the entire crew for a full equipment and protocol inspection. Right now." 3 careers ended before the clock hit noon. This was Battalion Chief Angela Andrews' first day at Station 41, a house notorious for pushing out anyone who didn't fit the traditional mold. In American fire departments, fewer than 6% of firefighters are women. Harassment and hazing are often dismissed as tough traditions. But what the crew didn't know was that Andrews wasn't just there to take command. She was there on a mission, armed with a list of anonymous complaints and a mandate to clean house. And the moment they handed her that mop bucket, they had just given her all the evidence she needed. Angela Andrews didn't arrive at Station 41 by accident. For months, the department's internal affairs office had been collecting a stack of anonymous complaints from this single firehouse. Reports of stolen gear, sabotaged equipment, and probationary firefighters quitting after just weeks. But every official inquiry hit a wall of silence. No one would talk, so the deputy chief made a call. He needed someone from the outside, someone with a flawless record and a reputation for being unshakable, to go in and see the problem for herself. That someone was Battalion Chief Andrews. Her assignment was simple: observe, assess, and report. But the moment she walked through the bay doors in civilian clothes, the observation became a test. She had graduated top of her class from the academy 15 years prior, one of only 3 women in her cycle. She spent a decade proving herself on some of the busiest ladder companies in the city, earning every promotion through written exams and practical assessments. The white helmet on her head wasn't a gift, it was a verdict. But in a culture built on tradition and tight-knit crews, that kind of merit-based authority can feel like an invasion. And Station 41 was a fortress. It was known as a good old boy house, a place where legacies were born, sons following fathers, uncles, and grandfathers onto the same rig. Its call volume was low, mostly medical aids and minor fires, which meant downtime. And in the fire service, unstructured downtime is where hazing rituals thrive. The crew she confronted that morning was led by senior firefighter Mark Dobbs, a 19-year veteran with a thick mustache and a louder laugh. To his left was Jake Ripley, whose father had been the station captain a decade before. To his right, the newest permanent member, Chad Miller, who'd only survived his own probation by, as the stories went, playing the game. They were the informal leadership of C-Shift. They decided who belonged and who didn't. Their weapon of choice wasn't violence, it was psychology. The relentless drip of humiliation, isolation, and manufactured failure designed to make a newcomer quit, or in their words, earn their place. What they considered a game had real casualties. The complaints Angela reviewed before her arrival told a stark story. A Hispanic probie last year found his air pack emptied before a drill, set up to fail, and then berated for endangering the team. He transferred out, citing stress. A female paramedic assigned to the station 6 months prior reported waking up to find her bunk drenched in water, her locker filled with shredded newspaper. She filed a formal grievance and was transferred to a different battalion within a week, her career branded as difficult. Each case was closed as unsubstantiated or resolved. The system, designed to protect firefighters, was instead protecting a pathology. But here's the thing about systems: they create paper trails, and Angela was a student of the trail. Before accepting the assignment, she pulled the personnel files for every firefighter at 41. She found patterns. Dobbs had been named in 3 separate informal complaints over his career, all for horseplay. Ripley had a disciplinary note for calling a black lieutenant from another station a diversity hire. Miller's file was clean, but his probationary reviews from 5 years ago contained curious phrasing. Shows excellent understanding of station culture and eager to integrate with senior crew. Code, she suspected, for someone who had absorbed the toxicity and now helped administer it. On that first morning, she had planned to observe for a full week before revealing her rank. She wanted to see the daily rhythm to witness the unguarded moments. But their assumption that a black woman in jeans could only be a lost civilian, a social worker, or a new probie they could break changed the timeline. The thrown mop bucket wasn't just an insult. It was evidence. A senior firefighter ordering a perceived subordinate to perform a degrading, non-firefighting task constituted a clear violation of department policy against harassment and hazing. It was the first brick. As the stunned crew scrambled to line up in the bay, Angela methodically began her inspection. But this wasn't about loose hose couplings or dusty rigs. She was auditing their culture. She asked Ripley to demonstrate the department's mandatory reporting procedure for harassment. He stammered through a half-remembered policy. She asked Miller to locate the written directive banning hazing rituals. He pointed to a faded bulletin board buried behind spare coats. She then turned to Dobbs and asked a simple question. Senior firefighter, describe the protocol for integrating a new probationary firefighter into this shift. Dobbs puffed out his chest. We show them the ropes, we test their mettle, we make sure they're not a liability when things get hot. Angela didn't blink. And does testing their mettle include assigning humiliating chores or damaging their personal gear? The bay went silent. The cliffhanger wasn't the inspection. It was what she did next. Dismissing the crew, she retreated to the captain's office, a space that had been empty since the previous captain retired 3 months earlier. The department had been slow to fill it, leaving Dobbs as the acting officer in charge. In the top desk drawer beneath a stack of old schedules, she found it, a small, worn notebook. Inside, in various handwritings, were names and dates. It was a log, not of fires, but of probies. Next to each name were cryptic notes: cried after hose drill, failed latrine inspection, quit after shift, and at the back a list titled traditionals with items like dead man's locker and bucket brigade. It was a playbook. Angela took out her phone and photographed every page. The anonymous complaints had just found their signature. But as she slid the notebook back into the desk, a single folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. It was a printout of an internal email chain, dated just 2 weeks prior. It was from a battalion chief in another division to Deputy Chief Matthews, the very man who had assigned her here. The subject line read, "Personnel concerned Station 41. The email urged Matthews to stop wasting resources on hearsay and let the house police its own culture. The signature at the bottom was from a well-respected veteran chief, a chief who was supposed to be her ally. The message was clear. The problem at Station 41 wasn't just a rogue crew, it was a network, and she had just walked into the middle of it with a target on her back. She had the evidence to end 3 careers that day, but she realized that would just be pruning weeds. The root system was deeper and protected. If she wrote up Dobbs, Ripley, and Miller on the spot, the narrative would instantly solidify. They'd be martyrs, a good crew disrespected by a new, overly sensitive chief. The email proved higher-ups would likely support that version. She needed a bigger play. She needed them to hang themselves with more rope than a single mop bucket. So she made a decision that would redefine the entire mission. She called the deputy chief. "Sir, I'm going to need more time here, and I need to come back tomorrow not as a battalion chief. I need to come back as a probationary firefighter." The deputy chief argued it was too dangerous. Going undercover in a hostile house with no backup violated a dozen protocols, but Angela was persuasive. The notebook and the email proved the normal channels were compromised. To understand the sickness, she had to live inside it. 48 hours later, a new probationary firefighter named Anna reported to Station 41. Angela Andrews's hair was tucked under a department tissue baseball cap. Her chief's uniform was replaced with standard blues, slightly too large. The crew on C shift did a double take. She looked familiar, but the context had changed. Dobbs squinted, then shrugged. Must have been wrong, just another probie to break in. Welcome to the family, kid. Playbook began immediately. They called her Rook or Hey, you. Her assigned locker was already tagged with demeaning stickers. Her first task wasn't checking apparatus. It was scrubbing the bathroom floors with a toothbrush. Angela, now Anna, did it without complaint. She was collecting data. Every snide remark, every excluded conversation, every deliberately vague order designed to make her fail was another data point. But on her third day, the hazing escalated from psychological to operational. During a routine drill, Ripley accidentally switched the labels on her air tank, giving her a nearly empty cylinder. When her low air alarm sounded embarrassingly fast during a simulated search, Dobbs screamed in her face about endangering the team. It was a perfect recreation of the complaint from the Hispanic probie the year before. Angela now had first-hand proof of a repeatable, malicious pattern. But here's where the real investigation began. Angela started to map the network. The harassment wasn't random, it was a curriculum. Phase 1, isolation and demeaning chores. Phase 2, sabotage during training. Phase 3, she learned, involved property. One morning, she found her freshly laundered uniform shirt in a heap on the bay floor, soaked in engine runoff. As she picked it up, she noticed Miller watching from across the room, not laughing, just observing. He was the quietest of the three, but his role was crucial. He was the archivist. He kept mental notes on what worked, what made a probie crack. Angela realized he was the inheritor, being groomed to run the program long after Dobbs and Ripley retired. She needed to get inside their confidence, so she started to play the role they expected, a probie desperate to belong. She took their insults with a bowed head. She laughed weakly at their crude jokes. She began asking Dobbs for advice on fireground tactics, appealing to his ego. Slowly, the vitriol lessened, replaced by a condescending sense of ownership. They started calling her our Rook. This was the most dangerous phase. It's when they let their guard down. One afternoon, during a slow shift, Dobbs was holding court in the kitchen. He pulled out the same notebook Angela had found in the captain's desk. He didn't call it a playbook, he called it the yearbook. He showed her pages with pride, pointing out names. See this guy? He washed out after we put hot sauce in his coffee every morning for a week. Couldn't take the heat. This one quit after we sewed his bunk sheets shut. Thought he was too good for us. Angela's stomach turned, but she kept her face neutral. She was seeing the ledger of broken careers. And then Dobbs turned to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote Anna. He hadn't drawn any lines or notes yet. Her performance would determine what he wrote. That notebook was no longer just evidence of past crimes. It was a live document, and she was now a subject in an ongoing experiment. The psychological pressure was immense, but it gave her an idea. If they were documenting her, she would document them. She began using her phone in the bathroom stalls to record audio notes after every incident, detailing times, names, and exact quotes. She took covert photos of the defaced locker, the sabotaged equipment, the notebook pages when left unattended. She was building a prosecutor's file from the inside. The first major pivot came from an unexpected source. The station's unofficial historian, an older firefighter on A shift named Lieutenant Greg Carson. Carson had 30 years on the job and avoided the drama of C shift. He'd watched probies come and go for decades. He saw Angela studying the old photos on the wall one day, the black and white shots of crews from the 60s and 70s. Not a single face of color, not a single woman. You see it, don't you? Carson said quietly, not looking at her. The tradition they're so proud of protecting never included anyone who looked like you or me. Carson was black. He transferred into 41 15 years ago and survived by keeping his head down and his mouth shut. He told her the history they didn't put on the wall. The black firefighter in the 90s who found a noose in his locker and transferred out within a month. The two women who attempted to join in the early 2000s and were driven out by a campaign of rumors about their competence. Carson's testimony connected the current harassment to a 50-year legacy of exclusion. This wasn't a few bad apples. It was the soil the tree grew in. Armed with Carson's account, Angela saw the bigger picture. The hazing wasn't just about bullying. It was a filtering mechanism. It enforced homogeneity. It weeded out anyone who might challenge the established culture, anyone who was different. This explained why the department's efforts always failed. They treated each complaint as an isolated personnel issue, not a systemic cultural one. But Angela now had evidence of the system. The notebook proved intent. The replicated sabotage proved method. Carson's testimony proved history and pattern. She had enough to go to the deputy chief and demand a mass suspension and a federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission investigation. But then she discovered the money. It was a throwaway line, something Ripley bragged about after a few beers in the rec room. He mentioned how the old crew used to get bonuses for keeping the station clean and traditional. Angela pressed Carson about it later. The lieutenant looked grim. He'd heard the rumors too. A slush fund, fed by overtime padding and minor equipment budgets, used to reward the enforcers and to create a legal defense fund if anyone ever sued. The email from the sympathetic battalion chief suddenly made more sense. It wasn't just about protecting a culture. It was about protecting a financial arrangement. The corruption had roots in the budget. This changed everything. Angela wasn't just up against a toxic crew. She was up against a protected, institutionalized system with financial incentives. Taking down Dobbs would be easy. Taking down the network that enabled and paid him would be nearly impossible. She needed a bigger trigger. She needed them to commit an act so egregious, so blatantly illegal, that it would force the department to tear the whole house down to save itself. The opportunity came on a rainy Thursday. A structure fire call came in, a fully involved garage. On the ride, Dobbs laid out the plan. Angela, as the probie, would be on the nozzle for the initial attack. It was a position of immense responsibility and danger. As they suited up, Ripley handed her air pack. He gave her a thumbs up. "You got this, Rook." Something in his tone felt off. During the attack, advancing the hose line through intense heat, Angela's air supply seemed to drop at an alarming rate. She signaled to back out, but the line was tangled. In the chaos, her low-air alarm screamed. For a terrifying minute in thick black smoke, she was trapped, her air nearly gone. It was only the quick action of a firefighter from the incoming truck company that pulled her to safety. Back at the apparatus, gasping, she checked her tank. The gauge showed empty, but the tank valve felt loose. It hadn't been fully seated, causing a slow, catastrophic leak. An accident, Ripley said, his hands up. Must have happened in the hurry. But Angela knew. This was phase 4 of the playbook, sabotage that could get someone killed. They had escalated from humiliation to potentially lethal negligence. This was the line. She had her trigger. But as she was being checked by paramedics, she saw Dobbs, Ripley, and Miller huddled by the engine, not looking concerned but consulting. One of them was on a phone, not a department radio, but a personal cell phone. They weren't worried about her. They were reporting to someone. The network was activated, and as Angela sat on the bumper, oxygen mask on her face, a chilling realization settled over her. The near miss wasn't a mistake. It was a test. And if she failed to respond the way they expected, broken, terrified, ready to quit, their next move would be more direct. The game was no longer about making her leave. It was about making sure she never talked. She was no longer an investigator undercover. She was a liability in the field. And in the fire service, liabilities have tragic, fatal accidents every single day. Back at the station, the incident was written up as a close call due to probationary error. Angela's air pack was sent for routine maintenance, erasing the evidence of the loose valve. The official narrative was being set in stone before she'd even given her statement. This was the system protecting itself. She knew she had to move immediately. That night, from a secure phone, she called Deputy Chief Matthews and told him the undercover operation was over. She had what she needed, and her cover was dangerously thin. But Matthews sounded strange, distracted. He told her to stand down, to return to headquarters in the morning for a debrief. He said the situation was more delicate than they'd anticipated. The word delicate was a red flag. Angela didn't wait for morning. She drove to the deputy chief's office at 10 p.m. The building was mostly dark, but his light was on. Through the partially open door, she heard his voice tense on the phone. "I understand, but she's a battalion chief. We can't just make her disappear. The union would." He paused, listening. "Fine. The transfer will look voluntary, health reasons, stress." Angela's blood ran cold. They weren't planning to act on her evidence. They were planning to transfer her out, to discredit her as unstable, and to bury the investigation. She retreated before she was seen. The network wasn't just at Station 41. It had tendrils in administration. The email she'd found wasn't from a sympathetic ally, it was from an active participant. She was alone, but being alone meant she was off the grid. She went to the only person she thought she could trust, Lieutenant Greg Carson. She woke him at his home, laid out everything: the sabotage, the slush fund, the deputy chief's conversation. Carson listened, his face aging 10 years in as many minutes. He'd been afraid of this for decades. He told her about the real power behind the good old boy network. It wasn't Dobbs. It was a retired deputy chief named O'Malley, who now sat on the city's fire commission and controlled a web of favors, promotions, and that slush fund. Station 41 was his pet project, a proving ground for loyalty. The hazing was the initiation right into his club. This was the "it gets worse" moment. The corruption wasn't mid-level. It was at the top, influencing budgets, promotions, and policy. O'Malley protected the culture at 41 because it produced firefighters loyal to him, not to the department. They voted how he wanted in union elections, supported his political allies, and ensured his legacy and his financial arrangements remained untouched. Angela realized taking down Dobbs would be a slap on the wrist. Taking on O'Malley was career suicide, and potentially worse. But Carson gave her a weapon. He kept a file. For 30 years, he'd quietly collected things: duplicate payroll records showing suspicious overtime bonuses for Dobbs's crew, photocopies of old work orders where expensive equipment was damaged and replaced, only to show up later in a volunteer department O'Malley supported. It was a paper trail of grift, using the department as a personal ATM. The hazing was the sideshow. The money was the main event. Angela now had two cases: the harassment and the fraud. They were intertwined. The hazing enforced the silence that allowed the theft to continue. She needed to connect them publicly. Her mind raced. The department wouldn't act. Internal affairs was likely compromised. She needed an external trigger. She thought of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, but that moved slowly. Then she remembered the local investigative reporter who had done a series on police misconduct last year. It was a nuclear option. Going to the press would make her a pariah forever. But it was the only way to create pressure the department couldn't ignore. Before she could make that call, the counterattack began. At 6 a.m., a formal complaint landed in the department's internal system. It was from firefighter Chad Miller. It alleged that probationary firefighter Anna had made repeated sexual advances toward him, creating a hostile work environment. It was a brilliant, vile reversal. It weaponized her gender against her. The complaint was detailed, citing specific dates and locations at the station. It was pure fiction, but it was credible enough to trigger an immediate mandatory suspension for her, or rather, for Anna. Her undercover identity was now a trap. If she revealed herself as Chief Andrews to fight the claim, she would be admitting to the unauthorized undercover operation, giving them grounds to fire her for cause. If she stayed silent as Anna, she would be suspended and investigated as a probie, destroying her credibility. This was their masterstroke. They had boxed her in using the department's own protective policies. The network was showing its sophistication. It wasn't just brute force, it was bureaucratic warfare. Angela received the suspension order via a terse phone call from a lieutenant in internal affairs. She was ordered to turn in her gear and stay away from all department property pending investigation. She was now officially on the outside. But they'd made one mistake. They assumed she was isolated. They didn't know about Carson or his file, and they didn't know about the reporter. From a coffee shop using a burner phone, Angela called the journalist, a woman named Sarah Chen. She laid out the basics: a deadly hazing culture, a multi-year fraud scheme, and a high-level cover-up. Chen was skeptical but intrigued. She asked for one piece of verifiable proof. Angela sent her a single, anonymized photo, a page from the yearbook notebook showing a list of names, and the note "Quits easy." Chen recognized one of the names, a firefighter who had very publicly sued the department for wrongful termination 2 years prior and lost. His case had been dismissed for lack of evidence. This page was the evidence. Chen was in. The collaboration moved fast. Chen used her sources to pull property records, cross-reference volunteer department inventories, and follow the money. Angela fed her details from Carson's file. Within 72 hours, they had a map. The slush fund wasn't just cash. It was a whole ecosystem. Inflated invoices from a specific equipment supplier, a company owned by O'Malley's nephew. Unexplained training, budgets that paid for Dobbs and his crew to attend conferences in Las Vegas. And most damning, a pattern of selling decommissioned department equipment, like those damaged air packs, to small, rural departments at a fraction of their value, with kickbacks flowing back to a shell corporation. The story was no longer about a toxic firehouse. It was about a criminal enterprise operating inside the fire department. The stakes had escalated from misconduct to felony fraud. Angela now had the leverage to force the department's hand, but she had to be strategic. Going public with the fraud would bring in the district attorney and the FBI. It would also cause a scandal so massive the department would have to choose between protecting O'Malley or surviving. She devised a final play. She would give the department one last chance to do the right thing from the inside. She put on her full dress uniform, her white chief's helmet under her arm. She walked into headquarters in broad daylight past the stunned clerks and directly into the office of Fire Chief Robert Vance, the one man above Deputy Chief Matthews. She didn't have an appointment. She had two thick folders, one labeled harassment, the other labeled fraud. She placed them on his desk and said, "Chief, you have a choice to make. You can lead the cleanup or you can be buried in the collapse, but this ends today." Chief Vance, a career bureaucrat who prized order above all, looked from the folders to her face. He had heard rumors of the problem at 41 and of the unstable battalion chief causing trouble. He opened the fraud folder. His face went pale as he scanned the first few pages, seeing names, dates, and dollar amounts connected to a former deputy chief and a city commissioner. The institutional survival instinct kicked in. He picked up his phone, not to call security, but to call the city attorney and the director of public safety. The house of cards was too big to contain. The network had just overreached. And as Chief Vance made those calls, Angela knew the real battle was only just beginning. The internal war was over. The public reckoning was about to start. Chief Vance's office became a command post for damage control, but the kind of damage he feared had already shifted. It was no longer a public relations problem. It was a criminal one. Within hours of Angela's meeting, the city attorney placed a protective seal on all related financial records. By that afternoon, 2 investigators from the district attorney's public integrity unit were sitting in the conference room next door, interviewing Angela and reviewing Carson's file. The department's internal politics were now irrelevant. The law was in motion. The first domino to fall was the fraud investigation. The paper trail Carson had preserved was specific and damning. Subpoenas flew to the equipment supplier, the volunteer departments, and the bank accounts of the shell corporation. The scheme was simpler than anyone imagined. O'Malley's nephew's company would invoice the fire department for brand new gear. The department would pay. Then, a few months later, a work order would declare that same gear damaged beyond repair. It would be decommissioned and sold for pennies on the dollar to a small town, which would then pay a consulting fee back to O'Malley's shell company. They were double-dipping, stealing from the city's budget and profiting from the resale. The total over a decade was just under $2 million. The criminal charges landed like thunder. Retired Deputy Chief O'Malley was arrested at his golf club home on charges of grand theft, conspiracy, and official misconduct. His nephew and the owner of the equipment company were arrested the same day. The news vans that gathered outside Station 41 were no longer asking about hazing. They were asking about felony corruption. The narrative had completely flipped. This legal earthquake gave Chief Vance the cover he needed to act decisively on the harassment case. With the DA involved, the internal resistance collapsed. Senior firefighter Mark Dobbs, firefighter Jake Ripley, and firefighter Chad Miller were placed on immediate unpaid administrative leave. Their locker room yearbook was entered into evidence. The false sexual misconduct complaint against Anna was retracted by Miller as part of a desperate plea deal, but it was too late. It constituted felony falsification of a police report. Deputy Chief Matthews, who had tried to transfer Angela, was suspended for his failure to report criminal activity and for his suspected knowledge of the slush fund. His phone records showed repeated calls to O'Malley in the weeks leading up to Angela's undercover operation. The departmental trials were swift. Dobbs and Ripley were terminated for cause, losing their pensions. Their union, faced with the overwhelming evidence of sabotage and the financial crimes of their benefactor O'Malley, declined to represent them. Chad Miller, in exchange for his testimony against O'Malley's financial network, was allowed to resign but was permanently decertified as a firefighter, meaning he could never work in public safety again. But the real change was structural. Under pressure from the city council and a now attentive media, Chief Vance announced a total overhaul of the department's probationary program. The probationary firefighter period was renamed the development phase. Hazing was explicitly defined and made a fireable offense on first violation. An anonymous third-party reporting hotline was established, managed by an outside firm, not internal affairs. And perhaps most significantly, the department entered into a consent decree with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, agreeing to mandatory bias and inclusion training for every member, and to aggressive recruitment goals for women and minorities. Angela's role was publicly celebrated but privately complex. She was offered a promotion to Deputy Chief of Training and Safety, a role that would put her in charge of eradicating the very culture she'd infiltrated. She accepted, but not before taking a month of leave. The psychological toll of the undercover work, the constant vigilance and humiliation, had been profound. She spent time with a therapist specializing in first responder trauma. She was a hero who needed to heal. Lieutenant Greg Carson finally received his due. At a quiet ceremony, he was promoted to captain and placed in command of a new Office of Professional Standards, reporting directly to the fire chief. His 30 years of silent witness were over. He now had the authority and the mandate to ensure no one else would have to endure what he did. The final, surprising detail emerged during O'Malley's sentencing hearing. In a vault in his home, investigators found not just financial records but another ledger. This one contained names of firefighters across the department who had received loans from the slush fund for medical bills, divorces, house down payments. These weren't gifts, they were tethers. O'Malley hadn't just been buying equipment, he'd been buying loyalty and silence, creating a network of indebtedness that ensured his control. This explained the depth of the silence around Station 41. Many who suspected wrongdoing felt they couldn't speak up because they were, in some way, compromised. The corruption was even more personal than anyone had guessed. Station 41 itself was symbolically cleansed. Every member of C-Shift was transferred and replaced with a new, integrated crew from across the department. The old photos on the wall were taken down and replaced with a new display honoring the diverse history of the department, including the stories of those who had been driven out. The bay where a mop bucket was once thrown now houses a crew mentored by a female captain and a black lieutenant. Angela Andrews's first official act as deputy chief was to visit that firehouse. She didn't wear her dress uniform. She wore her turnouts. She spent the shift with the new crew, drilling, cooking, and talking. No one offered her a bucket. They offered her respect, earned not through fear, but through the undeniable weight of what she had done to make their workplace safer and fairer. The system hadn't just been exposed. It had been dismantled and rebuilt with accountability as its cornerstone. The three firefighters who laughed at a woman in civilian clothes had no idea they were starring at the instrument of their own ruin. They thought they were protecting a tradition. Instead, they were its last, failed guardians. Their careers ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, bureaucratic click of a lock on an investigation file, and the turning of a page towards a better, safer future for everyone who follows. The story of Station 41 is a blueprint. It shows how a culture of exclusion, when left unchecked, can fester into criminal conspiracy. It proves that the most dangerous fires aren't always the ones you fight with a hose. Sometimes, they're the slow-burning ones inside the house, threatening to consume the institution from within. Battalion Chief Angela Andrews' story is exceptional, but the problem it exposed is not. The research is clear. Only 6% of career firefighters are women. Over 60% of black firefighters report experiencing racial harassment. For decades, hazing has been dismissed as tough tradition, a rite of passage. But data shows it's a gateway behavior, a tool for maintaining a good old boys club that systematically filters out diversity and protects corruption. What happened at that firehouse is a case study in institutional failure and recovery. It demonstrates that change is possible, but only when someone has the courage to not just report a problem, but to document it, to infiltrate it, and to force the system to confront its own rot. Angela and Lieutenant Carson didn't just win a personal battle. They rewrote the rules for everyone who comes after. But the lingering question remains. How many other Station 41s are out there? How many firehouses, police departments, or corporate offices operate on the same unspoken codes, using hazing and harassment as loyalty tests, hiding fraud behind a wall of silence? The answer is likely more than we want to admit. Real change doesn't begin with a policy memo. It begins the moment someone decides the cost of staying silent is greater than the risk of speaking up. If you found this deep dive into power, justice, and institutional corruption compelling, make sure you subscribe. We uncover these hidden stories every week, pulling back the curtain on the systems that shape our world and the people brave enough to challenge them. Your subscription tells the algorithm these stories matter. So hit that button and ring the notification bell. And now, as we conclude this investigation, I want to leave you with this thought. Every tradition was new once. Every change starts with a single decision. The next time you see someone being tested, being hazed, or being pushed out, remember the cost of that tradition, and remember the power of one person who decides enough is enough. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.